Hello and welcome to this talk, Introduction to Material Creation, Tilables and Trims. This presentation is the English version of a talk I recently delivered at a French event, Addon. Material art is a vast subject, and here I will try to share my thought on the topic. This presentation is targeted toward junior or aspiring material artists, and everything within it reflects my personal point of view. Few words about me. My name is Vincent Dérozier. I'm a principal material artist at Ubisoft Quebec on Assassin's Creed Shadows. For a more accurate depiction of who I am, here is a portrait crafted by my daughter. My journey in the video game industry spans over 15 years, fueled by a deep passion for environmental art, mentoring, and all aspects of artistic intellectual processes. Throughout my career, I have contributed to a diverse array of projects, including car games, third-person games, open world, multiplayer experiences, and both stylized and realistic productions. Perhaps you've come across some of my works, especially materials. Over the years, I've been fortunate to work across a range of styles and projects within companies or as a freelance artist. Additionally, I've had the privilege to deliver talks at renowned events such as MIGS and GDC. But enough about me. We are here to delve into the realm of material art. Material art is much more than rendering material spheres in marmoset. My aim here is to shed light on a topic that often go overlooked, in my opinion, either online or in educational institutions: the fundamentals and production methodologies. There's a huge amount of tutorial out there, and I don't want to add just one more to the pile. Instead, this presentation will focus on the essential aspect of the material artist role, encompassing their mandate, asset types, and artistic fundamentals. Then, we will talk about tilables, surfaces, the principle of physically based rendering, and blending techniques. We will then move on trims and talk about pixel ratio, layout, and usage. To conclude, I will provide a brief appendix featuring valuable links for those eager to delve deeper into specific subjects. So, first thing first, what is a material artist? Some studios employ environment artists or 3D generalists who handle both assets, 3D assets, and materials, which can be highly effective. Sometimes other studios have specialists solely dedicated to materials, and we call them material artists. To grasp the role of a material artist, it's essential to understand their responsibilities and tasks. A material artist can work on in-game materials, but also libraries that can be offline or in-engine, simply texture assets, obviously, create 3D assets, baked or not. Those are what I call just production assets, in a way that they are actual data used as is in a game. We can also have to work on alpha, smart math, stencils, etc., but also tools, shaders, or benchmarks. We can call all of that pipeline asset, which means that the data created to support or solidify the creation process. Lastly, a material artist may have to create trainings, retext data, from peers or just to help, as well as creating documentation, which can fall in a support category. Depending on the studio, level of the artist, or production milestone, you might have to work on all of those or just chunk of it. This talk will last around an hour, so we are just going to focus on the material section. In my opinion, it's a good introduction, and also it's the most common part of the job people think about, usually because of how shiny it can be on ArtStation. But I will, as I explained at the beginning, focus here on the fundamentals and production constraints. The idea being to help people to be more efficient and hired in the process. So, when I talk about materials, it includes surfaces, in games or not, which are simple material with or without structure, which can be layered or blended. Decals are in specific categories, as there is as much type of decal that there is of usage, like the scratch varnish, dusty patch on the floor or broken concrete corner. There is also another category in my mind when it comes to asset type. There is baked asset that are also a specific category that can be figurative or not, organic or man-made. They come with their own specificities and constraints. Today we are just going to focus on realistic surfaces. When it comes to create material or texture assets, I have some fundamental concepts that come in my mind. First, the context. The art direction, budget, time, software, etc. All of that is what I call the context, basically. Then the references. Photo, concept art, scan, but also videos are great source of material. Both are part of the brief. Then we get into the creation process of the material itself. So the first step is most of the time identifying the forms that compose the material, so the major breakups and features. Then comes the color, basically the color palette and its harmony. After that, you have the aging. Is it a brand new material, aged? How much? How so? Is it broken, discolored, sun-bleached? Those are part of what I call the core materials. Those three categories can help you sum up any surface before layering different core material together to create complex recipes, like some metal with paint, then rust on top of it, then you have some dust, for example. After that, you have the dirt, which can be just a core material itself, but can be very specific to what is under that specific layer, like rust or verdigris. The transition then become a pilar itself, as it say a lot about the material and its stature. So what was happening between those two layers, but what is happening in terms of definition and macro surface. Both form the layering part, mandatory to any realistic material which is not brand new. Next, the reflectivity of the material, which is a broad term to talk about the roughness value, but also pattern in contrast, and as we will see, it comes in handy with the micro detail, which is the realm of frequencies and high circulation, but we will come to that. Those compose what I call the material response. At last comes the most difficult pillar to understand, the exaggeration, which should not be mistaken with stylization. It's just a matter of artistic choices. What to take from a reference or what to let go, what to accentuate and how. Each one of those pillars could be talked about for hours, and applied with different leverages depending on the situation and surface. Here are a few examples of explanation and notes I built along the years during personal projects and mentoring. To illustrate some of those aspects, I'm going to focus on a simple material, a white plaster. I always think about those fundamentals when it's a simple surface like this one, or even a complex one like a wall brick. Fundamentals are called that way for a reason. Which brings us to tile labels and blends. First of all, what do I mean by tile label? A tile label is a texture, an image that repeats itself from one UV space to the next, in all directions to infinity. It applies to square textures but also rectangular ones, as long as you stay in power of 2. This notion can seem obvious, but I cannot recall how many times I explained this to artists that are more familiar with baking assets and not using tile labels. For example, keeping your UVs in one UV shell without any overlap is a baking constraint, not a constraint from when you work with tile labels. I thought it would be worth mentioning. To wrap up with the obvious vocabulary of material creation, textures are images, each one representing the aspect of a surface, like its color, volumes, roughness, normal vector, are the most common one. They usually are the output of a graph, layer of a PSD or numerical constant in a shader. Talking about that, a shader is a suite of mathematical functions that define how the light is going to respond on an object according to those textures. Are you going to be shiny? How much? To have cast shadows, depth, color, red reflections? Shaders are often represented in a nodal fashion, which is perfect for people like me that don't do HLSL. Finally, the material. The material is a container that encapsulates the textures and shader you could use. You can expose options from the shader and interact with those at the material level. This material is the final product that allows you to create 3D assets and environment. Here are a few materials made for Assassin's Creed Odyssey a few years back. Those materials are meant to be used in production. You have to take in account not only the material itself, but its usage, most of the time in blend recipes. Those surfaces worked as families, recipes, or kits, like environment material families. Like here you have some ground recipes, wall recipes, ceiling, and so on. So let's take practical example, a white plaster. Let's start with the context. I want to do a real-time material, a recipe for blend, realistic and PBR, procedural, in a day or two, and it has to be 2 meter by 2 meter. Then a few key references for the breakup and measure finish I want for the surface. So photo, texture, scan, and I have few videos on the side. As I said, this presentation is not meant to be a step-by-step tutorial. We are rather going to be talking about fundamental aspects of creation, which in my opinion are much broader and more important to share. 4 to be exact. We are going to talk about forms, color, frequencies and contrast, and material response, applied here to this procedural material made in Designer. So, most surfaces start with an 8 map. The creation of this 8 map is a succession of forms. You need to identify those, measure features, and slowly build those from big to small in add, max, min, and overlay, etc. You can see here some of the biggest steps in my 8 map, as well as few of the main features. you can already see the interaction between and the correlation between big to medium to small and the balance between those. This idea of forms is true for every texture, not just the 8. You can see here the main forms building my roughness. It's the same things for my color. So again, you have different type of features, but you can already have the feeling that there is some kind of logic between the big, the medium, and the small. And you can already feel also that some are more contrasted, more present than the other. A little tips about forms. Most of the time when I do surfaces, I like to finish with a little polish of my normals here and there. Think of it as a flatten or trim smooth border. It really helps to have a less homogeneous surface and to have a better eye circulation, but we will come to that as well. To illustrate a bit more what I meant by shapes in every texture, here are my normal and color, and here are a few of the major forms I created for the normal and for the color. The main one to compose my color, you can see that there is that hierarchy between the shapes and the rhythm as well. Talking about color is maybe one of the most intimidating topic. Realistic or not, understanding the color wheel is really important as an artist. It means knowing also how to use or to build a color palette. Knowing, for example, what characterize and effects of a monochromatic color palette, analogous, complementary, or triadic is really a huge deal, as well as understanding the difference between cold and warm colors. It will come a long way to enrich a color palette, create interesting shift, or stay discrete on purpose. The idea being you don't have to create always something very complex. It's just that you have to make bold choices. You don't have to endure your reference, and you have to be sure that you are picking the right harmony at the right time. It's not possible to talk about color for material without mentioning the PBR notion. When working on a material, it's very important to have accurate color that are credible, but also in specific ranges. In order to do so, don't hesitate to rely on PBR charts, but also quality scan like texture.com or quixel.com, or even your own calibrated photo. You might ask, what does PBR mean? So, few words about it. PBR is an acronym. It's the acronym of physically based rendering. It's a type of render that aims to recreate the behavior of surfaces and light in the real world. The first researches are from the 90s and application in production around 2000. Disney have created a simplified model for the movie Tangled, then use it in Wreck-It Ralph. PBR is now a standard used in every industry, from the VFX, animation, and video games. The particularities of PBR is its use of BRDF render model, physically plausible, taking account of energy conservation, reflection, microsurface, but also the type of material, metallic or dielectric. There is a wide range of shaders that are PBR, and I'm not going to go in detail with every specificities, limitation, or usage of those. This model, just keep in mind that this model aimed at creating a render more realistic, but also simpler and unified for artists. This presentation don't have the pretension to be a technical paper on rendering, but a good rule of thumb to have in mind for beginners: the darker a color is, the less contribution to lighting it will have. A good reason, again, to follow good sources of color ranges, like the one on physicallybase.info. Another important artistic aspect of PBR, in my opinion, is that it's a rendering approach. It's not an aesthetic. It can be used on a huge range of art direction as long as they need to be grounded. Back to my plaster. And another interesting aspect is the details, frequencies, and contrast. By that, I mean how many times a detail repeats itself, at which size, how much we can spot it from afar, and how does it compare to other elements. A good leverage with that is the notion of distance. Here you can see my surface from up close and a bit far, and you're going to see me adding some random noise to demonstrate that even a contrasted element is going to be lost at some point. You don't have to over accentuate a detail to be able to see it from up close, or you're going to risk to break the readability from mid-distance or from afar. Again, just make those kind of choices and don't undo your references or your little mistakes. The detail frequencies also come with a notion of rhythm and eye circulation. Here, I add a detail. The mask is looking like that in my color. Then I just basically break up my mask itself to attenuate the feeling of it, to be less homogeneous. If I remove this attenuation, it's harder, as you can see, heavier, and in my opinion, less interesting. Obviously, it depends on what you are looking for, the reference and the type of breakup, but most of the time, a good rule of thumb is to break up your mask to not be too homogeneous, or you are going to have basically some effect or layering that are very homogeneous. On the tip side, I often use iPass to navigate through high frequency masks like grunges. Here you can see me isolating shapes according to their frequencies and spread. The iPass is basically a tool that is going to help you to contrast and compress the frequencies, and it really is a big tool when it comes to play with ranges and frequencies. Here is an example of detail applied in a specific area to create high frequency detail while keeping rhythm. I basically spawn tiny pebbles, so tiny, they just look like sand, and they just come to fill some area on that sidewalk. So you can see here the color without on the left, then with those frequencies, and the same with the normal. Moving on to the next fundamentals, the material response. When I talk about that, I'm talking about how much light bounces on the surface and also how. So I like to talk about rhythm, but also speed, especially concerning roughness. We can see here the light running on the surface. When this one is detailed, the eye slow down because your brain have to basically slow down to analyze what it's looking at. On the contrary, when an area is more calm, it will speed up. This contrast basically creates rhythm. Roughness is also a fantastic opportunity to make completely different forms than the normal or color appear, like leaks, sweeping, finger marks. This brings another level of complexity and storytelling to the surface. This section is called material response and not just roughness because it's about the feeling of the surface. And how grounded each texture are. Something to not underestimate is to have a channel of ambient occlusion. It can be also very interesting to have a cavity map or micro occlusion. If you don't have those in your shader, you can basically slightly put all or some of those information in your roughness. Just be careful to not have double info. On the tip side, a very interesting mask for colors, but also roughness, is the thickness. You can generate one, even on a flat surface, by inverting your 8 map and generating an AO, and inverting again the result. This map can come in handy to create a very interesting layer of dirt, patina, like some kind of soot or pollution. Here is an example of such a mask on a wall brick. So here my wall almost finished, which is supposed to be realistic but is too clean to my taste. I create a procedural color layer which with few breakups and shifts. Then I use this thickness map I was talking about to layer it on top, using it as a mask. The result is a light layer of dirt that link everything all together and follow my volumes just enough to be grounded, but not too much to give the feeling that I bake some lighting information like AO or top-down light. Following those fundamentals and visual leverages and constantly comparing my data to references, I end up with this material. In production, we rarely create lonely surfaces for fun or just for our station. We often use those in more complex recipes. You might have saw that this material is kind of slick on purpose. It's mostly because it is part of a material recipe for a plaster wall. I have my slick material on the left, a decayed one with different breakup in the middle, and a broken one on the right. The idea being to blend those together. The blend. The blend is a technique heavily used in video games, really useful that offer the possibility to enrich quickly an environment. In order to have a common vocabulary and avoid to lose the attention of people, I'm going to explain here what is a blend. So let's take two simple textures, a red and a yellow one, and a top-down gradient, a vertical gradient as a mask. I'm going to mix both of those textures using my mask. You can see here that process. On the left, the mask, and on the right, the result. This blend is created in Designer just for the sake of the example. I can navigate between the white and black values to show one or the other textures using a level. I can also use a contrast to claim the value, basically, and create a more contrasted mask. It's exactly what would happen in the Unreal, except for the contrast, if I was just blending those two textures using vertex color. Now, let's complexify the recipe. If we blend a grunge on top of our gradient, the gradient represents our vertex color, and the grunge a random mask. The range stay the same, but the behavior changed quite a bit. The results feel more like a mix of varnish or just a paint on top of another surface. If that mask was not a grunge, but maybe a wall brick 8 map, we would create a blend that revealed the second layer basically through that specific pattern. It is what we call a 8 blend. Now, let's pretend that we don't blend simple textures, but full-fledged material. So, a reddish mud and some yellow pebbles. If we mix simply the two 8 map in max and use the intersection of the two masks as a blend mask, we will create what we often have on terrain, an 8 blend using two 8 map. The vertex color on top help to reveal one layer or the other constrained by those two 8 maps. Here is the same setup with two of my plasters, a slick one and a broken one. We can see the material A show when the mask is going to be white and the other one when the mask is going to be black. The interest of this blend setup is to be able to go from one to the other, obviously, but the biggest interest is all the steps you have between one or the other. You are not just going to have two material available, but a full range of middle steps, and you can also play with the mask and contrast. You can also play with that painting depending on the design of your asset, but we are going to come to this. You can see me here applying and playing with the amount of the material one way or the other. Here is how you can simply blend those two materials in Designer with using just 2-8 map and a gradient map to represent the vertex color if you want to have that top-down feeling on a cylinder. You first blend the 2-8 map using an 8 blend, then add a gradient on top in multiply. Use the results as a mask to blend the two materials. Of course, those blends, they are made in engine, not in Substance Designer in production. And you can see here a more advanced setup. The same type of setup here showcase on the blend of only the color, just for the sake of the example. I'm just like showcasing the blend of one base color and the other one, and I'm just using the vertex color, the red one, instead of gradient, like in SD, to be able to paint on the cylinder. If you create that setup for every texture, like the color, the normal, the roughness, you are just going to end up with the same result I have on the left. This setup is pretty simple. I have a brick material, a broken plaster, a worn plaster, and a slick plaster. Each one of those blends using their respective 8 map, as we saw, or some custom grunges, and vertex color. The red control the blend from layer 1 to 2. The green from 2 to 3. And the blue from 3 to 4. Free color info to drive 4 layers. You can see me painting between each layer, activating each one by hand. Don't pay attention to my cylinder, which has too much vertices to be painting friendly, but I intend to use it as a base shape for displacement, so I just tessellate it a little bit in advance. With the latest 5.4 version, I think, we can play now with blending, and I have dynamically it working with nanite. But let's keep everything here very simple. So it's just a cylinder with a good amount of vertices, but you could have just like two splits, two vertices, one at the bottom and one at the top, and it would be enough just to have a good gradient. Here you can see me making the last wall brick appear. And here in full screen, several tests on cylinders. So I guess you can grasp now how versatile and how useful it can be with only few material. Here we have a range of 4, but even with 2 material, we could have a lot of recipes. The same painting work using the same material on a shape representing a wall. Back on our plaster recipe, I hope you understand better the look of those materials and why they are so kind of simple, uniform, or boring at some point, because we want to have bold stage to be able to blend between one and the other. When working with blend, it's much more efficient to create distinctive on-off material. I'm pretty sure now you can identify the core material on all of those recipes. Moving on to the next section, trims and pixel ratio. So let's start with the pixel ratio. I feel like it's very important to talk about that notion, which is really, really useful and have a lot of impact in production. So pixel ratio or texel density. When we talk about texel density, we talk about basically the amount of pixels that build an image. So here I have different amount of pixels, and if those were not like random pixels, but actual textures, the difference in definition would be looking like that. So obviously, the more pixels, the more definition you have. But always depending on the size you use it on, which bring us to the notion of texel density. For example, if we use a 2K material on 2 meters, we will end up with a common texel density of 1K per meter, while our 256 pixel material on the right would be 128 pixel per meter, which would be called undermapped compared to the other one on the left. The reason we keep material as small as possible is that sometimes it's visually useless to go bigger, especially when using blend. If we were to create a 4 meters wall bricks, it will have to be a 4 meter material, a 4K material, which is, in this case, is not interesting. Better use a 2 meter material and make it tile. So, to establish the texel density, you need to define the size both in pixels, but also physically. How you want to use that surface and on what type of size. As I said, a 2K material will have, if it used on 2 meters, a definition, a texel ratio, a texel density of 1K per meter, or 10.24 pixel per centimeter, and will provide a good reference to identify your pattern, as we will see. Just keep in mind a good rule of thumb that a consistent texel density allows you to create visually consistent scenes that will load in an homogeneous fashion. A very important aspect of texel density is its correlation to the texture weight. Let's take this wall brick material, for example. It has the same texel density of 1K per meter I was talking about. It represents a 2 meter surface. This material is composed of several textures: color, normal, height, roughness, and AO. For the sake of the example, let's pretend that we combine those textures, which we do in production, just to mitigate the memory costs. So my material is now composed of two textures, two sRGB textures, one containing the color and height map, and the other one the normal, roughness, and AO. I end up with two textures of 2 megabytes each. The material then weight 4 megabytes, right? So it's a 2K for 2 meters material that weight 4 megabytes. If I wanted to increase my pixel ratio, and because we can only multiply a surface by 2 or divide it by 2, I'm kind of forced to enlarge it from that size of 2K to 4K if I just wanted to increase my texel ratio. So now I have a 4K material that I keep on 2 meter, which bring us with a pixel ratio of 2K per meter. But you can notice that my material is not just multiplied by 2, but by 4, which brings us to not sorry, not a poor texture, but a texture weight of, we move from 4 megabytes to 16. We don't imagine multiplying by 4 the weight of a material family in production, even less the texture of a whole game. If your work have to be downgraded for memory purpose, it will be at least visually by 4. Let's now, with that textile density in mind, dive into the concept and the realm of trims. We call trims a tileable material, square or not, that have a stripe-like structure. This one comes from architecture, where trims represent volumes that finish or structure a wall, roof, etc. at the top, the bottom, or anywhere a structure is required, like a door frame. We can create this type of material for architecture, but also props, decorated or not. Like the plasters, let's take a concrete example. Not concrete, but stone wall. A building facade. I have here few very classical trims, use cases from photo I just took in the street. By taking, for example, this building as my main reference, I can start to identify few elements for my trim that I might want. I'm looking for patterns that are very different in terms of shapes, so concave, convex, detail, flat, round, but also different in terms of usage. Bottom trims, middles, upper trims, door frames, etc. I identify few key references, and I also add a little reference in terms of size, which is, as we saw, very important. Here are a few close-up and references I had from another building down the street. I'm going to detail here the process on few elements so you can grasp the thinking process and reapply it. So let's take those two chunks, A and B. I basically would need to create those two patterns, right? According to my size reference, it would mean that the trim A, when unwrapped, flat is 90 centimeters and the B around 50 centimeters. The upper part of the trim add another 50 centimeters to both of them. Now, if I unwrap those two trims to make them fit in a material, I would have to create 250 centimeters of surface, which is more than my standard material I was talking about of 2 meters, 2K material. I could move to a 4K material, but we can already see that it's going to be a lot for just 2 trims. So let's take another stab at it. What I can do, I can just like simplify my dispatch, and what I choose, some part like the bottom or the top could be used from another part of my trim sheet. So I decide to remove those. It left me with only 70 centimeters for both cornices. And we can see here how much simplifying the patterns you identify can save tremendous space. The takeaway here is that it's not mandatory to recreate every side of a trim, and that you can have a lot of take to transpose references into actual 3D data. Now, the question is, do I have enough space to put 5 or 6 trim I add in my ref? I can already see that maybe I will be lucky to have 3 of those set up here. So I decide to go with the flow I was describing, but move on a material that is going to be 4 meters high. So following the same process, I plan my patterns with a little doodle to see if everything would fit. You can see here how much a trim sheet is not just a random stack of shapes. It might feel like it, but it's not. Or at least it's not supposed to be like that. Now that I have my plan based on my reference, I can jump into Designer, Max, or Blender to lay down my structure. For simple shapes like that, Designer can come in handy, at least in my opinion. I keep everything really simple at this step to be able to change, combine, or replace things that I need at any step. A little tips to help me stay right in terms of size and pixel ratio. Down the line, I create a little grid every time by hand, as there is no inbuilt Substance Designer grid. It's a very simple network of lines representing a white grid here every 20 centimeters and a yellow rules every 40 centimeters. At this step, it's very important to go and check the size as fast as possible in context, so it means in the Unreal. Trim on a cube or a cylinder, at least for me, can be hard to grasp. It can feel very, very nice like that to have a lot of stacked shapes, but maybe they are not that useful. So I always map those on a little plane and split those to understand in a better way what I have in store. Here you can appreciate my fantastically complex UVs. And while I'm at it, I create a little 2 meters wallstone material because trims rarely goes alone and are usually part of a recipe, as I was saying before that in the material section, which means a mix of material trim and other tileable or even baked asset. To troubleshoot further my patterns, I always like to add few mirror to one trim and create a door frame structure like that, or maybe just some trim that are going to go on the floor. It really helped me to see if the shapes work vertically, horizontally, and in this kind of intersection, if they still read well or if I need to adjust something. Once again, the UVs, they are fairly basic, and you can see that I already stack some of my UVs and everything is working just fine. You can see on the right new little placeholder that just appeared. It's another example, a bit more complex, when I am basically slowly building up my recipe and complexifying my example. So here you can see my little wall with trim at the bottom, trim at the top, and a bit of wall stone in the center. Again, my UVs that even show some overlapping. Those are not, again, they are not bad, and they are just here because I have my UV set up like that in my UV space, and I don't want to bake anything, so it's fine. And you have two different color also because I have two ID on my mesh, and a different of size. Even though my mesh have the same side, you can see the trim and the wallstone, they should be at the same side. It's just coming from the fact that my trim is 4 meter by 4 meter and my wallstone is 2 meter by 2 meter. And just like that, my test cell density just stay consistent. After those little tests, I can go back to my patterns. Now that I have my trim, I create a stone structure. It needs to follow the dispatch of my main trims. Remember the yellow rules I just made. And just like that, I play a lot with the vertical split to give rhythm and to help the eye circulation. So I'm just basically slowly building up that material with the same artistic fundamental than the plaster. I merge my shapes and balance those in terms of frequency and intensity, contrast of the details, which are here just the breakup on the corner and the lines. After that, I add some mid shapes and some micro detail and high frequency detail, keeping in mind that idea of rhythm and eye circulation. Again, I'm not going to go in detail into that graph creation. It's not the the idea, the mandate of that talk. It's pretty classical. Here I just sculpt from big to small, adding few chipping and hints of porosity, slowly layering details. The same goes for, as you will see, for the colors, which is a base with high frequency detail, color, luminance shift, following my structure, but also some grunges. I like to use a path of pollution, thickness, and patina to enhance the volume without baking lighting information, and a bit of discoloration and dirt to ground everything all together. Here's the final material with every texture, so the color, normal, roughness, AO, and heat map. The same material on my dummy in the Unreal Engine, except the vertical split that requires that would have required a little update on the UV on my door. Overall, everything worked as intended. I create a little zigzag wall with a similar structure than my placeholder, trim at the bottom and tops, wall stone in the middle. It gave me a visual understanding in context, which helped me to do some back and forth between Designer and Unreal very quick. Everything is really, really rough here. I can see that my wall stone cladding is too homogeneous and intense, so I need to balance my frequencies. My stones slightly too small to my taste. The upper trim is too complex, and the bottom hard to read, even though I was following the structure I had also in my reference. So I basically tried to address all of those while pushing my shapes. I add a door window setup with some column. I adjust the size of my wall stones and my trim choices. Once again, it gave me a way to illustrate my trim usage while testing my recipe. And I just add a little pediment at the top of the door, which is really just a box mapped on the upper part of my trim material. So I basically use probably half of my trim here, a bit more. I want to take a little minute just to talk about a recipe that comes in handy with that type of setup. We can see here. Here, my wall corner feels a bit simple and round, so I could polish it with a sharper bevel, extrude few edges, but it's really hard to get rid of the vertical split that are coming next to the edge. What I like to do usually is to create baked asset, baked stone like the one you see at the bottom on the floor. Those are stone, simple shapes, placeholder-like, that I just quickly sculpt in ZBrush and slap with a tileable surface. If I stack few of those, I create a specific wall stone corner. You can focus on the corner right next to the character. You can notice how it quickly cap and nicely finish the angle while just being a quick placeholder. So just imagine it if you just polish the situation on the data. For each one of those materials, I also create some variation to create some blend recipes like on the plaster. So my gray wall you saw is my base. I create a lighter, sleeker version with less frequencies in the middle. So again, the fundamental I was talking about. One with bigger seals, so with just to bring another rhythm, and a dirty one to play with the luminance and the color. Some of those materials are used as is, but you can just export the normal or with for the one, for example, with the broader seals, or just the base color for the lighter and the darker one, if you want it to be less expensive. The advantage being that you can easily go from these to these just using blending. So I really like this type of recipe, that it allows to create quickly some aging, storytelling, and iterate on the whole recipe of the kit. The look of the color, with the few luminance and temperature shift, we can already do a lot with just those few leverages and fundamental idea I was talking about. It's not finished. It still needs some polish. Few parts are still very intense. Some deco elements are missing, like the door, windows, perhaps ground and decals. But it will be for another presentation. If you remember the beginning of this presentation, I was talking about the mandates of a material artist. Today, we quickly talk about the creation of materials, about the two basics, stylable and trims. I hope this introduction was interesting enough and give you the will to dig a bit more in the subject. Talking about it, here are a few sources of information to dive into it. For the artistic fundamentals, Color and Light from Jess Gurney. It covers a lot of physical phenomenon and key pillars in terms of artistic fundamentals and intellectualize everything for artists. The PBR guide by Wes McDermott, which is a very good explanation for the topic of every aspect of PBR rendering, and it's way easier to read than one of the biggest technical papers that you can find online. The Ultimate Trim by Morten Olsen, which is still one of my probably favorite game dev art talk. It pushed the trim process further by bringing the concept of 45 bevels to give a baked aspect to geometries. And finally, I. Sanchez blog post about texture creation for video games, which is one of the only talk I know that cover the topics and have an amazing way to intellectualize the process and art fundamentals. Some images that were showcased as external sources, so you can find a reference here. And that's it. Thank you, merci. And if you have any question, let me know in the comment of this video. I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. Bye bye.